Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys this evening as I am playing Fighting Bujutsu in MAME.272, the recently released update to MAME. Because last month I talked about all of the improvements I had seen across the board in 3DO M2 emulation on MAME, I figured I would take a look at another Konami PowerPC board to see if those improvements had come across to another platform. And I am happy to say that I'm not 100% sure what happened, but Fighting Bujutsu is running faster and more stable than it ever has been. I will go into why I think that is in just a moment. Before I get too far involved, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, got a Patreon link down below as well. But Fighting Bujutsu is an absolutely incredibly rare game, also known as Fighting Bushu and Fighting Bushu 2nd in Japan. To say that boards for this game are absolutely limited would be an understatement. I know of about 6 to 7 that still exist in the world, and trust me, most of them are broken. If you haven't watched my series, I have one of the broken Konami Cobra sitting next to me as I do this voiceover, and I am still trying everything I can to revive it to be able to play this game on real hardware. But for 99.99% of everyone else, it's going to be MAME. I'm just going to dial up some overclocks here to see if I can get any more performance out of the game. But even at its stock clocks in the current version of MAME, I'm just seeing across the board better frame rates and a lot less issues than I did the last time I talked about this game maybe 2 years ago. Now, I did go through the GitHub repositories for MAME, and I did notice there have been some updates recently to the PowerPC driver as far as MAME is concerned, so it seems like someone's gone in and made some changes, and that might be actually improving the overall functionality of these games. And again, when I say this PCB is rare and absolutely a dumpster fire of garbage, I 100% mean it. I still have this thing basically half disassembled on my desk, trying everything I can to get it to show any signs of life. And I will have more videos in this series coming soon. I'm actually going to be getting an oscilloscope and checking out some of the actual data going through the board to see why it isn't posting whatsoever. Because right now, all this thing likes to do is boot loop with an E1 code, and then it does it again and again and again, never displaying anything on screen. It is an absolute monster of an arcade board, and like I said, pretty much no one else is going to be able to even try to boot one of these things. That is why MAME emulation is so important, and that is why it's so incredible that this is actually working as well as it is. Now obviously it's not a native frame rate, it is running slower than it would on real hardware, but you can take a look at this image here and there's basically almost no graphical corruption issues whatsoever. Every single building in the background is made out of polygons, the character models have a ton of polysym as well. This hardware is basically supposed to keep up with Sega Model 3 and the best of what Namco had to offer, and you can see at least in this one scene it 100% is able to do so. And last time I took a look at this game, it would freeze, it would stutter, it would go down to 1 to 2 frames per second when you were actually trying to play the game. Now I'm not saying in the current version of MAME that I would classify this as 100% playable. It definitely is a stilted experience and there is going to be some lag in the inputs, which isn't helpful for an arcade fighting game, but short of that you can 100% experience this game and get a ton of fun and knowledge out of doing so. And that is why emulation is so absolutely important, because even if I'm able to fix this PCB, it's just going to be me who can play it unless I take it to a few conventions, and even then it's not going to be a ton of other people that can experience it. And you can definitely dial up the sub CPU as well as the graphics effects CPU to get a tiny bit more performance out of the game, but don't go any higher than 150. I actually found that caused more stuttering than it did any sort of benefit. But it's one of those things. I've absolutely been fascinated by this game. I've always wanted to play it on real hardware, and even though it's literally sitting next to me, I still lack the ability to do so. But MAME is what keeps these games alive, and that's why emulation again is so important, because this board only ever ran 2 games. Everyone thinks it just ran Fighting Bujutsu, but it also ran a version of Racing Jam from Konami. But the reality of that game is it also exists on the NWKTR board, which I do have in my collection, and can be emulated perfectly fine. So it really is just Fighting Bujutsu that people can't experience unless they find original hardware that is functioning, and currently I know of exactly 2 PCBs in the world that actually boot up and allow you to play the game. The other 5 I know that exist are either not yet tested or tested and proven to be broken, and that is not very good odds whatsoever. So it's incredible to see this functionality come into MAME and actually improve. As you'll see here, at least in some spots, depending on how the camera's focusing, we basically are hitting 60 frames per second. Every once in a while, one of the effects will break and you'll see a little bit of weirdness on screen, but otherwise the performance is so much better than the last time I tested this, and do be aware, I'm testing it on the exact same system I did last time I ran a video on this. The specs have not changed, but here's your soundtrack sample. You can hear the music and how the sound emulation has some problems. 45 seconds and I'll be right back with more. Now, of course, the audio has a lot of problems, but I wanted you to listen to those problems because I wanted to kind of correlate it to what we saw last time I talked about 3DO M2 emulation on MAME. It has the same sound stuttering. When the sound stutters, you see slowdown in-game. Now, I'm not really sure what the cause of that would be, whether there's something in the PowerPC implementation when it's actually trying to process that sound when it hangs causes that stuttering, but it's interesting across two different generations of Konami hardware, the 3DO M2, which uses PowerPC 602s, and the Cobra, which uses multiple different PowerPC revisions, you end up with the same starting audio that drops the frame rate down in game. It's just an observation. I don't have an answer, but I know that there's something in there that would be beneficial in the future. But as far as the character models are concerned, as far as a lot of the effects are concerned, you can tell that it looks a ton better than last time I took a look at it. And honestly, you'll see this stage here definitely running slower than the rest of them, and I think that's down to the snowfall effect that's actually coming in on screen, because this snow always seems to lag the game harder than anything else I've seen in this capture or previous captures. So it could just be an implementation of one of the calls to the GPUs on board, and it's just causing the game to slow down, because you can actually get different weather effects in different arenas. Sometimes they're sunny, sometimes they're rainy, sometimes they're snowy, and if you play the same area with no weather effects on, suddenly you get a faster frame rate. So it's one of those things. The IBM workstation GPU array inside of the Konami Cobra and inside MAME emulation must just not be complete enough yet for this to run at close to full speed, because you'll see every once in a while the game will lift up its speed, and it seems to depend on how many snow particles are actually on screen at once. Now, I don't know if they're actually genuine particles or not, that's what I'm calling them, but there's something in that effect that seems to slow the game down in this one stage. Now, moving over to the next stage, you're going to get a good example of the pseudo real-time lighting that the Konami Cobra could handle. That's one of the things that Konami really marketed this board as. You'll see the color changing on the wall, you'll see the flames affecting the surface areas, and that actually seems to be running relatively well in this current build of MAME. And I will say that Konami was definitely onto something with the Cobra as far as its power level. I don't know if it's quite Model 3, but it is very, very close. The unfortunate part is, just like Model 3, it was an incredibly expensive board for Konami to produce, and it was definitely temperamental and failed a ton. Basically, the boards would heat bake themselves to death in the case. The thermal envelope was not designed correctly, so you'd end up in a situation where a lot of this hardware would die early, and because it was so expensive and Fighting Bujitsu never really took off in arcades as a popular game, Konami abandoned the hardware and never did anything with it again. So it's possible that they maybe only made 100 or 200 Cobra boards in the first place, and because of the high failure rate, we're left in a situation where there's only a handful of them known to still exist. So MAME is going to keep this dream alive for everyone else in the future, and now today, if you actually want to go in and play Fighting Bujitsu, you can take a look at it. And you'll see here, at least in this stage, not facing the sun, we're getting near to full frame rates. Every once in a while it's going to dip down, and depending on the effect on screen, it could get worse, but I would classify this as quote-unquote playable. It is not going to be perfect, but it is going to be fun enough for you to understand what Konami was going with here. And I will say, now that the controls are a little bit more responsive, you can get some combos off and really get a sense of what's going on. But you tell me that that is not just Joe Biden in a fighting game. I swear it is him. But as we move into this next match here, you can see as that final round effect comes in, the engine will slow down, and when it goes away, it'll rise back up to close to a native frame rate. Now, the performance I'm getting here is definitely playing around with overclocks, which I did in the previous video, and honestly, my CPU has more than enough brute force grunt to be able to run anything in MAME at full speed, if it will run at full speed. So if you're running this on a potato, you're definitely not going to get the same result that I am here. But Konami Cobra emulation just improved somewhere down the line, as to stuff like System 22 and System 23. There's been a lot of improvements on the 3D side of MAME, and I can't wait to see what the next year brings in 2025, because there's stuff like Konami Viper that just doesn't really run well whatsoever, and has a ton of graphical corruption, and it's just another board that can be rare and expensive for people to collect. But just taking a look at a scene like this, two fighters fighting in what looks to be downtown China or Japan with all of these signs on the wall, you can just see how good this board really did look, and that's why I hope sometime soon we get to full speed emulation in Fighting Bujitsu, and I'm also able to correct this PCB and be able to get real hardware captures of every character for posterity, because even if this thing ends up emulating perfectly and you wouldn't be able to tell from real hardware, the reality is your odds of actually playing this game on real hardware are 0%, unless you're one of my few subscribers who owns more arcade boards than me. If you haven't told me you own one already that works, I would be very upset with you. But short of that, we are done. Go check this game out. It's definitely improved, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.